What you're watching is raw footage out of the GoPro. There's no hypersmooth, there's no real steady, there's no warp stabilizer, there's no kind of stabilization software applied to this footage. And I'm just showing you the ability for these dynamic rates, the dynamic rate system, to be able to give you this kind of a flight quality. However, this is not its only use. The dynamic rate system is designed for you to be able to specifically tune the stick feel, not your rates, to what you want. That means if you're a racer and you want a super nervous stick and you want it to be incredibly over responsive, you could do that. If you want it to be very smooth and flowy and squishy and touchy and not so touchy, you can absolutely do that as well. So it's really completely up to you. In my opinion, I think that this is one of the most useful developments that we've seen in flight code in quite some time. And I'll talk more about where it came from and how it was developed, and not so much about that, but basically what my thoughts about it a little bit later. But let's first jump into what they are and discuss how you actually use the dynamic rates. This is EmuFlight. If you are at all familiar or comfortable with Betaflight, you will be completely at home with EmuFlight because it is just a fork of Betaflight. It works exactly the same way. You can flash your firmware here. Everything is exactly the same. It is Betaflight with some tweaks and additions and changes to it. And so when you go into the menu system, you are greeted with all the same stuff as Betaflight. And over here, I want to show you the only things that I changed about this particular quad are my motor idle is at 5.2. I think it's like 4.9 as default or something. I like a little bit more, usually higher than 5.2. My board orientation, obviously I set that. And I make sure my air mode, anti-gravity and dynamic filters are on. And then when you go into the PID menu, which is the thing I'm going to focus on here, you can see that my PIDs are default. I haven't even selected a preset. And in EmuFlight, we have all these presets that are designed to be closer tunes to what you might be running out there, which is really nice. But over here, I'm just using straight defaults. I did turn down my throttle boost to 4 instead of 5, just because I like a little bit more of a squishy throttle. And what I was flying is a Cinewhoop. It is a 3-inch ducted 540 gram all-up weight, huge, way overweight for 3-inch props on 4S Cinewhoop. Now, it's not your normal Cinewhoop because typical Cinewhoops are known for flying like garbage, but I've been working really hard on this one, and all the components and everything are coming for it. And EmuFlight did play a pretty significant role in improving its flight performance, but I'm just showing you that this is full default. I don't PID tune almost ever, really almost ever. I just don't mess with this stuff. I just don't have the patience for it. I focus more on my rates and my rate settings and sometimes filters. Now the filters here I've adjusted a little bit, but I'm not getting into any of this stuff. For the most part, everything is pretty default, and if you run full default, it's going to pretty much fly the same with my setup. So now let's focus on the rates, and I'm going to do a little segment on the basic rates again. You may know it, you can skip the next minute or two, but I'm going to go over it just in case people don't, because if you don't understand the basic rates, then adding dynamic rates on top of the basic rates could be a little bit confusing. So I did a video about this a while ago, but I'm going to revamp it a little bit. I'm going to try to simplify it even more. So if you look at the RC rate, focus on the red line on the curve here. As I increase RC rate, you see it looks like the end of the red line is curving, but in reality, that's not what's actually happening. What it's doing is it's just twisting the entire line. So don't worry about the end so much, even though the quad speed obviously is going up here. As you can see, the degree per second, the rotational rate degree per second is going up real fast. It's focusing more on the middle of the graph. And so just think of RC rate as increasing the sensitivity or speed of the middle of the stick. That's the middle deflection area around the stick. If you think of this graph as the range of motion of your stick, up, down, left, right, the middle deflection area is being increased in speed or rotational rate by increasing your RC rate. Now, if you look at your super rates and I start increasing that, you see that the very ends of the graph start becoming very asymptotic, very steep, very heavily curved. And what that does is it's increasing the speed at the ends of the stick, the maximum deflection point. So right now, how this is set up, the graph looks like it's been flattened in the middle, but it hasn't actually. What's been happening is that it just adjusted the graph to account for this drastic deflection at the ends. So it's just showing you the ends with respect to what the center may look like so that you can compare the two. But in reality, what's happening here is that this quad is just getting really responsive at the ends of the stick. So if you go full deflection, the quad's gonna go nuts and start rotating like crazy and flipping and rolling, whatever. The default numbers for both RC rate and super rate are 1 and 0.7. And as you can see here, again, my numbers are very close to default because defaults are pretty darn good. Now, RC expo is a little bit weird. If I start increasing RC expo, you'll see kind of the middle of the graph start to bow. And that's really what it does, is it just bows the middle of the graph. It doesn't increase your velocity rate, and it doesn't particularly change the sensitivity in the middle. However, as you start moving the stick, it starts to change the sensitivity. And I personally don't recommend touching this at all because there isn't that much movement on the stick for you to just try and fine tune every single tiny micrometer. Like, it's just too much. It's a setting that's too much. It's antiquated, in my opinion, at this point when we have RC rate and super rate. Once you have your rate sorted out, then you can move on to the dynamic rates. And maybe you've been doing this stuff a while and you have rates that you're already comfortable with, just use those numbers and don't take any of my advice because you already have numbers that you're comfortable with. And it's very important that you use the numbers you're comfortable with because the dynamic rates are a modifier of how the stick responds to your inputs. It's not a rate system on its own. So use the numbers you're definitely comfortable with. Or if you're new, just consider using defaults because they're pretty darn good. And so before getting started on the dynamic rates, I want to point out the name at the top of the screen, Kevin. Kevin is the initiator of EmuFlight. He's the manager of EmuFlight at this point, and he is the one that came up with the dynamic rate system completely on his own. And I point him out because a lot of these people that make this code, they don't get paid for it, and they're just really doing it out of the passion of it. And it's nice to get recognized for something, and maybe it'll be important to you in the future. Maybe he'll come out with something else in the future that is a significant addition to the flight code. In my opinion, I think this system is a very significant addition to all flight systems and all stick input flight tuning systems. And I think it's really going to be used a lot moving forward because it's just so awesome when you even begin to use it. The moment you use it, you'll understand how amazing it is because it doesn't do a whole lot, but it does enough to give you a lot more control over the quad. But when I know who made the things, I definitely always point it out and give credit where credit is due because I don't know everything and I'm not perfect and I get things wrong, but when I know, I definitely want to give credit. Okay, so let's look at these numbers. There's 6 numbers here and they seem confusing, but honestly, they're probably the most understandable numbers in the entire software suite. So let's look at these numbers. The rate center refers to the center of the stick. The rate end refers to the end of the stick. Everything in the middle is blended. So you can tune the middle of the stick and the end of the stick. The sensitivity, I'm going to go over these numbers, these words real quick, and then I'll go over them in more detail afterwards. The sensitivity is literally what it says, the sensitivity of the stick. So if it's below 100, then you're reducing the sensitivity of the stick. If it's above 100, you're increasing the sensitivity of the stick. This number goes from 0 to, or 10, or no, 20, it goes from 25 to 130. It doesn't go below 25 because then it'll just be really slow. And it could go higher than 130, I assume, but I don't know if anybody wants their stick to be more than 130% responsive. But now let's go over to the correction number. The correction number is a number that is applied over time. It's the best way that I can explain it is once you initially start moving the stick off center, then the sensitivity kicks into how responsive it is. But then once you start moving the stick around, the correction is how closely it's following that stick when you're moving it around. And so just think of it as how much it catches up over time. Let's leave it at that. Now the weight is something that's a little bit different as well. The weight literally resists movement, and so it makes your stick feel weighty. Now I've been begging manufacturers for dampened sticks for a while because I really want the sticks to have some force to them when you push them, if you push them too hard. And this kind of gives you a software dampening on the stick. This number goes from 0 to 95. If it was at 100, then you wouldn't be able to move the quad at all because it resists all movement. And so now let's go back to the sensitivity. This is a Cinewhoop. It flies like garbage, even though I've done so much work to try and make it fly better. It still flies like total garbage, and it's made for slow, docile, squishy, cinematic style flight. And so these numbers are ultra, ultra squishy. I wouldn't run these even on a freestyle quad. I mean, I might run them on a freestyle quad if I'm doing really flowy stuff, but take that into consideration. So my sensitivity in the center is 55, while it's 100 at the ends, and it gets blended through the middle. And what that means is that I have full control as I move the stick further and further away from the center point. And that is very important for me, even on a super squishy cinematic quad, because I want to be able to have that safety factor of being able to pull the quad in a direction if I absolutely need to not run into a human or something else. So it's very important for me to have control at the ends, whereas while I want it to be very squishy in the center. Now the correction is 25, and so I have it low because I want this to not respond to when I am trying to blend my sticks together. So if you're trying to do a coordinated roll or coordinated turn, you might not get it perfect. You don't want that quad to like wobble around and twist around. I want it to just blend it all together or just not be so responsive. And that's what the correction does over time. So it just reduces how, the example I'm thinking of is if I'm in a car chasing a subject, the car is bouncing around and my finger is not going to be fully stable. So if my finger is wobbling around, I'd prefer not to have the quad wobble around. So I just have that low. And on cinematic flying, I'm not moving the stick super quick anyways, so I don't want the thing to respond very quickly. Now at the ends, it's set to 10 because that's just the default number because my sensitivity is already at 100, so it's already fully responding. So you might as well just leave it at 10, it doesn't really matter. It's only when your sensitivity is above or below 100 that changing this correction even makes any difference at all. The weight is what I explained. It is a resisting number. And so it's probably the hardest one to actually explain, but it's the easiest one to conceptually understand. It literally resists the movement. So it makes the quad feel really delayed, which is typically not a good thing, but it also, like the correction, gives it this weighty feel where it doesn't really respond to your drastic stick inputs very much. And so I like that. And at the end of the stick, I still have mine set to 50 because I like that. I don't want the thing to be wacky as crazy if my fingers happen to twitch around. I want to have this freedom to be able to move my fingers around cleanly and just not have to worry so much. I can fly this quad with these settings around like with my foot and it would still look smooth because it doesn't require me to have any specific stability to anything. And so if you're a beginner, this really might be a little problematic because there is a pretty significant delay around the mid of the stick because my weight is really high, my correction is low, my sensitivity is low. So around the center stick, it really sucks. While you get closer to the end of the stick, it's really, really nice and responsive. And this allows me to make super ultra fine micro movements coupled with my really low rotation rate. And this thing flies like a freaking phantom. It's so easy to fly, it's hard to mess up, but I still have full control when I need it. And so that's the dynamic rate system. A racer will want something very different. And if you go to the GitHub page, it has all this described out for you as well. The link is in the description below, and it's got recommendations for cinematic, freestyle, and racing. And this is really just a place to start from. It doesn't have a recommendation for Cinewhoops. This would be my recommendation for Cinewhoops because I would assume everybody wants it to be super squishy and super soft and easy to fly. And so that's a dynamic rate system. I honestly believe that this is one of the most significant things to be added to flight code and just manual input management, because this dumb little stick that we're moving around, there really isn't a whole lot of movements. There's not a lot of things. If the stick only moves like 10 millimeters, how much more can be squeezed out of this stick with respect to the control input that we're giving it? So it's really nice to see this because you might end up changing your normal rates because now with this control, you can actually increase your max rotation rate, maybe if you wanted, and still fly the thing really darn smooth because you have that weight in there, or you have the sensitivity adjustment in there. Racers, like I said, they probably wanted to be very, very responsive around the mid-stick and much less responsive around the ends, but I'm not a racer, I'm just guessing that. That's what I would want right now. I'm a super novice racer, so that's what I would use if I was doing this right now. But for the most part, even racers seem to prefer a good amount of weight on their sticks because it really does smooth them out. While they like to have a really responsive stick, it's really jarring watching the quad that's darting around the screen going through gates. So it's much easier to watch the feed when it's flying very smoothly and your stick movements match up and are coordinated much nicer. And with this, you don't need to have quite as much coordination. And everything in the middle is totally up to you. You can tune it as you wish. And so a couple other things I want to discuss. Well, first of all, where this rate system came from was I made this video a while ago that was titled Tips and Tricks for Flying Smoother or something like that. And I recognized the control input dilemma back then, and I've been kind of asking for something like this since then, for years now. And it's very hard to put into words, very hard to conceptually even understand if it's put into the proper words. And the biggest dilemma is having the stick be in the center. Because when you move the stick from left to right, that stick needs to transition through the center, which means that the spring on the stick is going to the 0 point and then once again gaining tension in the other direction. And moving through that center point is very jarring. It's got this clicky noise to it. It's not smooth when you see it in the video feed. Additionally, if you are moving the stick to the right and then you quickly move the stick to the left, the moment you pass that inflection point, the quad just darts the other direction. And it still happens in this case, because if it didn't, then it would just feel super unresponsive. But the whole point of this is, in my opinion, for cinematic style flying, is to smooth out that center point and also smooth out how your sticks blend when you're trying to do coordinated movements. And what coordinated movements is, like a coordinated roll or a inverted orbit or something that's really complicated or complex, or just trying to fly really, really smoothly. And so I explained this to Kevin over many months, and this is what he came back with, which is honestly beyond my wildest dreams. Now, I do think that this will need a little bit more adjustment in the future. I think that these numbers should be put on sliders. This is coming straight from me. Kevin can do whatever he wants. It's just my recommendation, or what I hope to see moving forward, or what I expect to see Betaflight or other software, other firmware versions do, is I would expect these to be put on a slider. And that's because having just arbitrary numbers are arbitrary. Like when you look at the PIDs, these numbers are honestly arbitrary. They don't mean anything. It could be 5 million or it could be negative 5 million, who knows? But when you put these numbers on a scale, since they're already pretty much percentages, they can still have numbers attached to them, but it gives you a visual endpoint. You know how high or how low you are on this spectrum. So it makes it really easy for a human to look at them and deal with them, because you know, oh, okay, I want my sensitivity to be lower. Let's just move it down. Oh, that's the minimum. We can't go lower than that. Oh, that's the maximum. We can't go higher than that. So let's just put it somewhere in the middle, a little bit less or a little bit more. So it really is just like it's not like a super duper fine tune. I need this exact number, this exact way. It's more like I sort of want it like this, sort of want it like that. Seems good, and you go with it because it's kind of like a very organic feeling kind of thing. All right, so the last thing I want to explain or discuss, or it's just a statement, really. I don't know why there's so much drama around flight code and these flight code suites. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me why Betaflight doesn't like another flight code, or why another flight code system doesn't like Betaflight. None of them are making any money from it. KISS, in my opinion, is one of the only ones that are doing things in a reasonable manner to be able to support themselves with a dedicated future, because they have a reasonable way of supporting themselves. It's just confusing to me to see any flight code or any group of developers be angry at another group, because everybody's just contributing to this. So I'm impartial. I have no loyalties to any particular flight code. I have the ones that I prefer. And if you ask me right now, I prefer Betaflight, EmuFlight. Flight 1 is not bad. KISS is great also. Their hardware is better than the rest of them. And what is there? I think there's other. iFlight is also really good, but it's also another fork of Betaflight. But basically, they all fly well. They all fly great. We've gotten to this golden age of FPV where everything flies fine. Nothing is bad. So I don't understand all the anger between all these flight code systems. Just use whatever you want. Use whatever you like, and go with that. Anyways, that's it. Sorry for the very long video. And this will be kind of a part of the whole cinematic set of videos I will be working on, because there's a lot of things coming down the pipeline, and it's going to be really cool. So stay tuned. Floss your teeth. Take care. Bye.